I don't mean 10 and 12 years old. I'm talking about y'all. And y'all have come in and done a wonderful job in this church. Wow.
That's very nice of you to say that.
And we should have never done it. We did what we did, keeping it open till y'all came in, and then y'all took over.
Just a second ago, Barbara, you were beginning to talk about the sanctuary, or I think you were, the physical structure. Could you address that, about how it's changed over the years that you've been here?
Well, from the time I first remember until just recently when they moved it up here, the pipes were across the front of the church, closing off the windows that were at the top here. And when I was a child, I remember we walked up the side steps up to onto the platform. They didn't have the steps in the front. And of course they had the pipe organ in the front of the church on the wall, and the choir sat there. But we had two lecterns, one a small one where we had the Bible of the church. The scripture was read from that, and then the big one was where the minister preached. And so it was and the communion table was up on the platform. So it had a different look than what it does now. But it certainly looks nice, I think. I think it's an improvement the way it looks now.
At about what point did the change occur to which we see now?
I don't know.
About how many years ago was it changed so that we have the look that we do now?
I remember that, I don't.
Seems like,
Of course, we know when the pipes were moved up, when the organ, but
it seemed like maybe in the 50s. I'm not sure. I went back and studied some of my budgets and things where we appropriated money to have the work done, like in probably 1020, going through the book, taking a little while, but it seemed like maybe in the 50s, sometimes here in the 50s.
I'm interested in just hearing a little bit about your first impression when you first came to Circular.
I don't have one. Since I was 18 months old.
Like,
I was going to say
yeah.
you've been with it for a long time.
Well, my first impression of the church was, I was raised in a Baptist church in Charleston, which was very strict. They didn't believe in dancing and playing cards, even going to the movies. Very strict church. And I came here, and wow, it was like I was liberated. I mean, debating on joining the church or what, and I decided I liked their liberal outlook. They had the communion table was open to anyone. When the church I was at, you had to be a member. And so I before we got married, Mom and I got married, 42, I joined the church because I liked their liberal viewpoint, and if you didn't believe exactly what they're saying, it was all right. And I like that.
When you describe Circular to somebody who's not familiar with it, how do you describe Circular Church?
What do you think of?
No different from any other place, really.
Well, like, the gentleman I worked with on Tuesdays, and I was telling him about the church, and I said, well, one thing about our church, when we serve communion, you have a choice between wine and grape juice. You don't like the wine, you get grape juice. And I don't know if it's still this is the policy or not, but it used to be that if you joined the church and you wanted to be submerged in a sprinkle, that they would do it. Or I know one young couple, they joined the church back in the during the 50s. One of them wanted to be submerged. So we made arrangements in the First Baptist Church one Saturday afternoon. We used their baptism pool, and our minister went down there and baptized them, submerged them. The other person wanted to just be sprinkled, and they were sprinkled. And I like that choice.
So there was the option.
So I was telling my friend that, he said, what? You know, that was some of the things I remember about telling people about the church. I know. So I assume that still the same policy. I imagine if somebody wanted to be submerged, Berkman, take them down there to the First Baptist Church and submerge them, baptize them, like the Baptists do. I reckon they would. I haven't asked him.
But for many years, for communion, we sat in the pews. Most of the time we sat in the pews, and the deacons went up to the front, got the communion and passed it out. And the ladies would cut the little squares of bread, and we had the grape juice, and you never gave the children. That was unheard of. I mean, that was like a sin to let the children have it.
To take part in communion.
Right.
And when did that change?
Well, just in the last 10 years, probably.
I don't see anything wrong with that. I mean, letting the children have it. But
It just, when our children came up, if they had asked for any, you would have been horrified to think.
What did they do while the adults were being served?
Sat there and got mad because they couldn't have any.
But I remember though, when we only had communion then every 3 months, and all the deacons, we were assembled at the back of the church, and we would march down the aisle, and we would sit on the front pew, all the deacons. And then some of us would serve the bread, and some of us would serve the grape juice. And we pass it up and down, just like you do in the Saint collection.
And certainly no women served it.
Right.
All men, none of the women served communion. All men, all the men deacons.
Interesting.
Now, the women could be deaconess and they could fix it, but no serving.
Wow. So, what kinds of roles did women have in terms of any leadership activities in the church?
No, the clerk of the church was a woman. In fact, it was my aunt for many years, Agnes Kessler. But we belonged to the women's groups, and if we decided we needed a new stove or new curtains or new anything, the women would raise the money by having bazaars or turkey suppers or whatever. We'd raise the money and help pay for it, but other than that, we certainly didn't have any role as far as...
No women on the standing committee. It's called a council now, but in them days it was called a standing committee. There was no women on the standing committee, all men.
Well, that's obviously changed. What do you have any ideas about what brought about a change in that particular area? About women?
Women got a little bit more aggressive. But the first president was Bernadette Rowley, Farina, she is. But
She was the first woman president of the church.
and she was very assertive, and she didn't see why we couldn't have a woman, so she pursued it.
Was that before or after Bill Sharp?
became president? After?
Yeah, after Mel Sharp was president. She was a businesswoman, and she, you know, then was out in the field of business, and she, I don't know how it was, she asked them or what, when she was put up for presidency, and at the annual meeting, they voted her president of the church, and she was the first woman president.
Let's see. I wanted to just ask you to think about Circular's involvement in the community and community issues over the years. What kinds of changes have you seen in terms of Circular being involved in community programs or programs coming into Circular?
I think Circular has always been involved in community things like the women worked for many years with the migrant workers, and Mrs. Higdon was very active in that, and she'd go down each summer and help them with their programs, and the ladies would make little bags for the children, or bags with things that the women mostly could use. So we worked with that for many years.
How about going to the Unitarian Church?
Well, yeah, every other year. Well, every year we'd have Thanksgiving service with the Unitarian Church. One year they'd come here, and then one year we'd go to their church. So we did that for many years. And
how about organizations and programs which Circular has hosted or allowed for meetings and that sort of thing?
well, they started the first Montessori school in Charleston over in Upper Lance Hall, and PAR,
Paul was originally here,
Hotline,
and well,
and then in the 50s we adopted a Vietnamese family, and we rented a house, people donated furniture and so forth. We got groceries, and each week the members of the church would donate a certain amount, and we'd take and give them groceries.
in fact, we set up a separate checking account for the Vietnamese Family Fund, and the members of the church pledged like $5, $10, $20 a month, and we rented the house up there, right across from the gate where you're going to the old Naval Hospital at the Navy Yard, and not the Naval Hospital now, when an old Naval Hospital, inside the Naval Base, right across from the gate there. There was a little house there. We rented that house for them. I was looking in the records last night. And we supported them for about 11 months. We paid their rent, their gas, and lights. We helped them with their food. And in fact, a lot of the members of the church right out there before they moved in and spent a couple of days cleaning the house up, because whoever lived there before had left it dirty, and we wanted it to be nice and clean when the Vietnamese family moved in. And so we had a separate checking account called the Vietnamese Fund that we set up to pay their expenses, and we did that for about 10 or 11 months, and then they were on their own.
Did you ever hear what happened to the family?
Yeah, I wonder.
No, they were Catholic, and so they attended the Catholic Church, and they just gradually.
They came here once in a while to express their appreciation. They would come down, and one of them would get up and say how they appreciated the church helping them, but they were not very active in the church. they were, you know, they were of another religion, and so they didn't come here, except occasionally to give us their appreciation of what we were doing to help them.
Do you recall, or are there any issues that really were controversial in the community or within Circular in which the community took an interest over the years?
Well, the more, I've already spoke about this, the more controversial one was the open door policy, which was heavily debated and talked about, and finally was voted on and was passed. And a few of the families left, or they didn't believe in it, they didn't want the open policy. And that hurt the church some.
I think Bill Sharp was talking about that. Is that when he was talking about, he told the congregation he was going to resign as the president of the church if they adopted this this policy to close the doors to certain minorities?
And it hurt the church. It set the church back.
How did it set it back?
Well, like I said, some of the members left, and some of the members who left were the financial supporters of the church, which, you know, I know the treasurer not before to talk about things like that, but not to be realistic. And we lost some revenue, and so. But then when Dr. Barnhart left and Bob Boston came in, one other controversy we had was during the Bob Boston here, I don't know if he told you about this, but we had what's called a coffee house. Two young people ran the coffee house under Bob. One of them was our youngest son, and that's when they took in the hippies and the people who were lost or ran away from home. They would come here, and once a week, the members of the church with other members of other churches would bring food in, and we would feed them every Wednesday night. And during the week, they had the upper land hall was open, and they could come in there and to get away, to have a place to come to, and it was called the coffee house.
Even some of the neighbors weren't too happy about that.
And a lot of the members of the church were very upset about it. They didn't like it. Of course, we thought it was all right. Not because our youngest son was helping to run it, but we thought it was a good thing. Or Bob Boston was there, and he would counsel people.
Bert.
And then Bert came in too, along with that, and between the two of them, they sometimes they would have maybe a young teenage daughter had ran away from home, and maybe she wanted to go back, but didn't have any money. Well, then we had a little special fund set aside, and then would buy her a bus ticket and a little money and send her back home to her family. And Bob would call the family and say, "Your daughter's here." And some of the older members of the church kind of frowned on it. They weren't too happy about it. But we did it anyhow. And we did help out a lot of young people who had different ideas about the Vietnamese War and the Korean War and things like that. And so they came here with their long hair and all that.
Well, you've touched on this actually, but what was the reaction of the community to Circular? What kind of reputation did they have because of these things that they did that might have been a little unpopular?
Well, a lot of the other churches like St. Philip and St. Michael, I think, really frowned on us as being way out, but that didn't stop us. So.
Laura and I thought it was a good thing. Well, they were helping a lot of young people, like say, Bob Boston and Bert helped to get some young people back to their parents. And the church bought many of bus tickets for the one of us and give them a little money to buy something to eat. Well, call the family, say your daughter's here or your son is here, and you want to come home. And Bob and Boston and Bert also did a lot to help those messed up young people. I don't know when they were messed up, but they just had other ideas from what most people would think they should have. So we were in favor of the coffee house. We thought it helped.
Well, over the years, you all have heard, I'm sure, a lot of sermons. And is there any one that you remember in particular that
No.
stands out in your mind? I'm just wondering about what is the way that you and you said this in other ways, but how do you really describe circular and the people, the members, or the people who choose to attend circular?
Really, the only comments we have about the way circular is now, as far as the people are involved, and thrilled to see the children, and we like the thoughts that there are so many more younger people, with older people being there, but not as many. Most people, when they talk about their church, they say they have so many old people and they don't want to change things, whereas ours is more, everybody is ready to change and try different things, and I like that.
Sort of experimental.
I don't mind that.
One description, willing to try new things.
Yeah.
Well, how about, of course, you indicated the pastor that married you here in Circular. So for that reason, I'm sure that you remember him. What are some of your memories of the other pastors that we've had here at Circular over the years?
I didn't get a question.
I'm just wondering about your memories of some of the other pastors that we've had here at Circular.
Well, one of the men, Reverend Ossie Besson, he and his wife came from New York. And he came down and really built the church up. He was outdoor, and if you didn't come to church on Sunday before the week was up, he would be calling you or finding out why you weren't here, or what's wrong, what's the matter. He spent a lot of his time, he was a full-time minister, and he really built the church up. And it seemed like to me when he left, there was about around 200. I don't remember, he built the way up from what it was, and built up, of course, nationally. When you have more members, you have more money. But Reverend Bedford and he and his wife really did some hard work. And like he had a men's club. Once a month in the afternoon, he would get a couple of people to help him, and we would have a big supper once a month for the men in the church. And I was one of the people who helped him. When I worked on the night shift, so I would get up and come down here in the afternoon and help Reverend Bedford. And one of the other men, the fellow, he and I would come down and help Reverend Bedford cook the meal. It wasn't nothing elaborate, but we have a enjoyable meal, and we would have a speaker. Once a month, he would have a speaker here. And we had all the men in the church were invited to come down once a month in Lower Land Hall. And that helped to build the church.
This was just men only in this particular group?
Yeah.
And so their function was social, or did it have other functions, this group?
Mostly social, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well,
That was to counterbalance the strong women's groups that we had here, I'm sure.
I've heard a lot about those women's groups. It sounds from what I've heard as if they had a big hand, played a big part in the social activities that the church put on over the years. Are there any of those, any social events or functions that really stand out in your memory?
Well, not so much that the women's groups played a part in them, but there were many social events that, like the Easter egg hunts and the picnics we'd have on all day Saturday, and the turkey suppers and the bazaars that we work all year to have enough things to present, and just things like that.
Yeah. These turkey dinners, I've heard a number of women comment on those. They must have really been something. It seems that everybody remembers those.
Yeah. Well, it was a lot of hard work put into them, but that would, support the projects that we wanted to work on. So.
one other thing, talking about the minute, Dr. Barnhart, I should have carried on, that slipped my mind. Dr. Barnhart had a radio program once a week. He preached a sermon on one of the local radio stations, a 30-minute program every week. He preached, he ran up until the time, almost until after he retired. He still had it. And what he paid for out of his own pocket, the church didn't pay for it when he had the money, but Dr. Barnhart had a 30-minute sermon on one of the local radio stations.
This was on Sundays?
It was on Sunday morning. On Sunday morning before. And when he did it during the week, they taped it so that he would be here on Sunday morning for the church. But it was on Sunday morning. Every Sunday morning he had a 30-minute program.
Was the sermon that he recorded for the radio the same one that you would hear in church?
No, it was a different program. Well, we listened to it at home. It was a different subject altogether. And he did that for a long time, and he paid for that himself. The church didn't really pay for it. Dr. Barnhart did that out of his own money.
Was how did the congregation react to that?
Very good. Everybody thought that was good. Or then they gave the church a little publicity advertisement. And I know when I was a child, even when I went to high school, when I passed by here on my bicycle, I thought this was a strange church. When it was never open. For years I thought it was a Greek church.
A Greek church?
Well, there was no sign up there saying this is a Congregational church. But when I was in high school, I had a paper route I used to ride my bike by. So the news and courier used to be right next door. And I would ride over there on my bike and pick up my paper. And I'd ride by and I used to think, well, this is a strange church. And I never dreamed I'd get married in it and join it. But for some reason I used to think it was a Greek church. I don't know why it's Greek, but it was never open. And now it's not open. Of course, I never come here on Sunday morning.